Back in the 20th century, before the internet, cable television, and the ubiquitous cell phone, almost everyone read the newspaper and often subscribed to news magazines. Time, Newsweek, Look, and Life magazines were on every newsstand and brought the public in-depth stories and amazing photographs of the biggest events of the day. Time, which owned Life, is still printed, and Newsweek is available online, but the weekly large-format publications are gone. What was it like to chase a story for these publications in the 1960s and 70s? And what have we lost in understanding the news because of their demise? Gerald Moore was in the thick of it, covering stories and editing Life magazine, and he's written about his adventures in journalism in his book Life Story: The Education of an American Journalist. He came to Life from a New Mexico newspaper as an entertainment reporter. He didn't think he fit in with the seasoned journalists at the magazine, who seemed to know everything about culture and the arts. But no expense was spared in his education in that field.
I arrived in the entertainment department as a young reporter and was, anxious to go out and do stories. And of course, the department was staffed by these absolutely wonderful people who knew everything there was to know. Mary Letterby knew everything about movies, and Tom Prideaux knew everything about plays, and we had people who knew everything about music. So there was hardly any place for me to fit in. What they did was they sort of gave me an opportunity to become a culturally educated person. I went to every play that opened on Broadway. I must have gone to several dozen concerts. They would occasionally fly me up to Boston to see a tryout of a play. It was just this huge cultural buffet, and I was kind of free to wander around and eat from it. Eventually, I felt quite guilty because I wasn't really producing anything, and so I made a fuss about letting me go do something, and so they shipped me off to Los Angeles.
Moore wasn't sent to L.A. to cover Hollywood, though. It was an assignment to look into the use of a little-known drug called LSD, which was still legal at the time.
People thought that it was going to change human nature, that if everybody took LSD, it would be the end of war and strife and so forth. There were a lot of people taking LSD in California, people of a certain age, but the general public didn't know about it. And so we did a big, big story in which we pretty much covered it from the time it was invented through various medical experiments with it to the time that it became a kind of popular pop culture drug, as it were. I think we sort of broke the story of LSD in many respects.
Back in the 60s, it wasn't just the hippies who were taking LSD. Moore says that Time Inc. founder Henry Luce and his wife Claire Booth Luce tried it themselves.
They had heard about it from friends, and they called a researcher in Los Angeles, Dr. Sidney Cohen, and had him fly out to their place in Arizona and give them both LSD. Henry Luce talked about it quite openly after he was asked about it. He described his afternoon staring at a cactus in his Arizona garden. I think Claire Booth Luce said at some point that she thought it may have saved her marriage.
The hard part of covering the story was that there wasn't much happening that you could photograph or illustrate.
We were surprised, I guess, by the fact that when you go to a place where people are using acid, nothing is happening that you can see. Obviously, it's a psychoactive, psychedelic drug, and so there's a great deal going on in the mind of the person who's taken it. But in terms of trying to photograph something, they sit in a chair and stare, basically, which presented us with a pretty big problem in terms of trying to illustrate what an acid trip might be like. But the story took us in other directions, too. Timothy Leary was being tried on drug charges in Laredo, and we went down and covered that trial. There were some very wealthy people who were supporting Leary, supporting his research. We went to visit their place in upstate New York. We looked at all the different aspects of the drug, including the medical aspects and the research parts of it. So it was a pretty comprehensive story about LSD at that time.
Another story where Moore and his photographer were having a little trouble finding something to take pictures of was one on sonic booms. The Concorde supersonic airline was just coming online, and many people wanted it to fly across the United States to shorten the time it took to get from New York to L.A. There was a fear, though, that it would do a lot of damage with its sonic booms as it flew over land. The government wanted to prove that sonic booms were no threat, so they built a little city at White Sands, New Mexico, and invited the press to watch as a military jet flew over at supersonic speeds.
They had every kind of building you can imagine. It was like a small Midwestern village. and they invited the press to come out and spend the day there, and they would fly an F-114 across the village at supersonic speeds to demonstrate that everything was okay. They sort of did that all day, and they bored the press. TV guys from the networks were getting pretty anxious because there was no story really for them. The photographer I was working with had lined his cameras up against a window in the hope that whether using a slow shutter speed, the window would vibrate from the boom and it would distort the photograph. So toward the end of the day, when not much had happened, I think it was NBC said, could you have the plane fly over the village at a low altitude so we can at least get a picture of the plane and the village in the same frame?
The officials granted the request, and as the day was wrapping up and the press was being briefed about how sonic booms wouldn't bother any buildings or people on the ground, the fighter jet made its low-altitude pass.
And at just about that moment, the pilot flying over the village, misunderstanding his instructions, came over the village at about 500 feet at Mach 1, and it just blew windows out yards away from where they were. It almost deafened us. It felt like it was going to knock us down. My photographer got a fabulous picture because he had the motors on. His cameras were running, so there's shards of sparkling glass flying out into the sky and this big airplane above it. It didn't work out the way the FAA and the other people had hoped it would.
As any seasoned journalist knows, those reporters who leave a story early because not much seems to be happening often miss the big event altogether. Moore had this experience as an editor at Life. It was in September of 1971 when prisoners at the Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York rioted and took over the prison. He sent a photographer and reporter up to Attica to cover the story.
They spent 2 or 3 days up there, and they called me and they said, there's absolutely nothing happening up here, and one of them had an important social engagement. I've kicked myself ever since for caring that he had an important social engagement. But I said, well, okay, if you really think nothing's going to happen, then come on back. Well, of course, about 12 hours later, the police stormed the prison and killed many people and shot people, and it was a huge mess. And we completely missed it because my guys had an important social engagement and left.
Moore says that in the 1960s, the news magazines like Life were really feeling the pressure from television news coverage. Most Americans would turn on the tube when a big story broke, leaving photojournalistic publications to play catch-up.
We began to feel it, I think, in the late 50s as television became more available. Once every house had a television, we were aware that we had a competition, certainly for news stories, with television. By the early 60s, we were quite aware of it because television had begun to have things like instant replay, and they had color. By the mid-60s, they had good color. And the advertisers were grumbling about it. They would say, gee, we're spending this much money on an ad in Life, and we're getting 8 million circulation when we can spend the same amount of money at CBS and we get 20 million. So we were struggling with it. I would say the struggle began in the late 50s and it became intense in the 60s, and I think it was really television that did Life in the early 70s.
By 1972, the economic situation at Life was bad and getting worse. Moore says that it was time for him to say goodbye to the magazine and the colleagues that he had grown so close to over the years.
I felt that the magazine had to make so many compromises in quality and in the way it did things that I just didn't feel that I could work there. My instincts were wrong for that condition. I couldn't make good judgments about news because what I had thought was news, they would say was too expensive maybe to cover, or we're not going to cover so much news anymore. We're going to try to do other things. I was just completely out of sync with the economic necessities that the magazine was facing at that time. It just seemed better to leave than to drag it out. As it turned out, I left just weeks before it folded.
Life published its last regular weekly issue at the end of 1972. Moore says that its demise, along with the closing of many other news magazines and newspapers, leaves a void in the in-depth coverage of big stories. It also leaves readers without much guidance in deciding what events are truly important.
When I pick up the New York Times, the editors at the New York Times have made some decisions about what's important. And they've made a 3-column headline on the front page, or they've done a 1-column headline on page 10, but it gives me some sense of what they think is important and what I should pay attention to. When the newspapers are gone, that's gone, and I don't know how an ordinary reader decides what is important. Unfortunately, I think what a lot of people are doing is they're just reading about things that interest them and nothing else. There is this fracturing of public opinion in a way, I think, so that people watch the cable TV station that reinforces their beliefs, and they read the blog that reinforces their beliefs, and all of these things are isolating. I don't know the answer.
During his career at Life magazine, Gerald Moore covered many stories in the 60s and early 70s, and you can read about them and how news magazines contributed to our culture and society in his book, Life Story, available in stores and online. He invites listeners to visit his website at authorgeraldmoore.com to find out more about him and to read his blog. For more information about all of our guests, log on to our site at viewpointsonline.net. You can find archives of past programs there and on iTunes and Stitcher. Our show is written and produced by Emily Parker and Pat Reuter. Our production directors are Sean Waldron, Ronnie Sidarsky, and Reed Pence. I'm Marty Peterson.
Summer fairs and festivals mean one thing: good food and cooking competitions. Home cooks are busy creating recipes that will win them the blue ribbon. Fruit is always a key ingredient in delicious and fresh desserts. Dole canned fruit is ready to use and cuts down on prep work. It always delivers sweet, ripe fruit. Dole canned pineapple is available in crushed, tidbits, chunks, and sliced varieties, so it's perfect for any dish where you want to add a sweet taste of the tropics. Dole canned fruit is also great for salads, smoothies, or mixed into cottage cheese for a quick, healthy snack. Whether you're creating a prize-winning recipe for a contest or a tasty treat for your family, let Dole canned fruit be your inspiration. Find Dole canned fruit in your grocery store, supercenter, or club store. Visit dolesunshine.com for recipes and tips from the experts in Dole's Packaged Foods Test Kitchen to create your own ribbon-winning culinary creation.
Summer is a time for family road trips, and what's a family trip without your four-legged friend? But when the weather is hot and the family is crammed into a car, dog breath can put a damper on your drive. So don't let it. To help make sure your pup has fresh breath, clean teeth, and healthy gums, use Pedigree Dentistix treats. Dentistix treats are clinically proven to help reduce plaque and tartar buildup. With a clean mouth and fresh breath, your family and your dog will be able to share endless hugs and kisses on the road this summer without dog breath getting in the way. So go ahead, pack your Dentistix treats and get on the road. Start creating those unforgettable memories with your pup. Whether it's close-up cuddles with your backseat buddy or kisses with your furry co-pilot, the close moments are the best. For more information, visit pedigree.com/Dentistix.